put the slide up here, and I don't know if we can turn down the lights up front a little bit so we can see them. Great. Well, I wanted to also thank Amy for organizing this panel, and thank the IACP for bringing us out from New York City, and thank all of you, of course, for being with us this afternoon. Andrew and I are thrilled to be here. If for no other reason than to finally get to meet Michael Ruhlman, because everybody assumes that people who write books, we've all met each other before, we go to parties together. You know, it's not the case in this instance. In that, I just lost my mic. In that this is the first time we had an opportunity to meet him. There we go. It's easier for someone else to do it. Thank you, Michael. And already, it's a very helpful connection. That's why we come to these conferences. Well, I can hold it here. I don't have a problem making myself heard. But you know, so anyway, it's wonderful to finally get to come together, and we're really thrilled to be here with you today. And so it was interesting when Amy had mentioned that there was such a strong reaction to the title of the panel, which I think she'll talk about a little bit later. But just wanted to start by asking the question, if you can remember your reaction when you first heard the title of the panel, which was not, by the way, the original title of the panel, as all four of us can assure you, whether it was negative, neutral, or positive. And do you mind doing a quick show of hands? Was there people who had a negative reaction to the title of The Death of Recipes? Okay, how about neutral? Curious, just want to come and see?
More neutral.
And mildly or wildly positive? Oh, excellent. That's a nice mix. Okay, I think that the negative people are a little more vocal. So what we thought was that perhaps there were some questions that could be raised on the subject of recipes, and or on the subject of what your reaction was. And I think for the people who did have some fear about the title of the recipe and what's happening with recipes, we understand that about 80% of you define yourselves as having work that centers around recipes, that could be pretty unnerving. So are you defining your job too narrowly? It's a good question to be asking yourself right now, and should you be broadening that? Conversely, do you realize that change brings as many opportunities as it does challenges? And do you want to always keep in mind, as those who had a joyful response to the title, that everything happens for a reason and that it serves you? So a quick example that we just wanted to point out is that 100 years ago, there were a lot of people who were really nervous about the way the world was changing too, and some people saw it as a problem. Those who thought they were in the horse and buggy business thought, oh my God, automobiles are coming, what on earth are we going to do? But it was those people who really defined what they did as being in the carriage business, and companies like Fisher Body, who transformed carriage bodies into automotive bodies, horseless carriage bodies, were able to really thrive in the economy ahead. So I think all of us who are feeling nervous at all, or who have ever felt nervous at all about what the future brings, really wish we could look into a crystal ball and predict the future. And I think that Andrew and I have done so. We'll tell you what we're seeing. We don't think human beings anytime soon are going to be giving up that desire to eat. We don't see that anybody who's developed a love for cooking is going to be willing to give up that love anytime soon. And we do think that people who are really thoughtful cooks are going to be continuing to seek ways of making what they do more efficient, more pleasurable, more enjoyable. So if you want to continue to thrive in the future, you want to keep thinking about what you do and how you're doing it, and to solve new problems. So one of the interesting things we wanted to look at was how people really cook. And the frustrating thing that really drove us crazy was the fact that there are so few academic studies out there that really have studied this basic human behavior. How do we cook? There was a rare study that came out in 2007 from the UCLA Center for the Study of Everyday Lives of Families that showed that, and it was the first academic study that studied on a moment-by-moment basis using videotapes how people really prepared the evening meal. 80% of those meals were prepared by mothers, so we love seeing lots of guys in the audience professionally and when we speak to home cooks, but the truth is that it's mostly moms out there who are still making dinner according to the study, and that less than 5% prepared dinner from a recipe. How fascinating is that? So of course, we were very curious why that was and wanted to really think about that a little bit.
And so really what we wanted to look at is, well, what is great about a recipe? What's the strength of a recipe? And I think when you look at it, the most important thing is it allows the documentation and replication of successful dishes. You want to be able to make the same thing time and time again. It's perfect if you're new into cooking. If you're going to make a meatloaf or you're going to make a souffle, you need a recipe if you're doing it the first time. You need to understand, you need a little handholding, that's fine. It's also a way to learn new cuisine. I've eaten at Frontier Grill hundreds of times, and I still can't walk into the kitchen and make a mole or a good pad thai. I need to pull out a cookbook and find out what's going on. And I think it's really important for professional chefs. And it's not like I'm going to walk into the French Laundry at 7 o'clock and say, you know, TK, decided to switch up that salmon cornet that people have been traveling thousands of miles to try. You'd be disappointing a lot of people, you'd be fired. But the most important thing is, I remember as a professional chef, on menu change day, Lydia Shire or Ann Rosenzweig, whoever my chef was, would come over with a stack of recipes and say, this is what you're going to do. And as a professional cook, your job is not to innovate, your job is to recreate. So it's important to know that there is a place for recipes across the full spectrum. And certainly, if you want to look at chemistry and technique-driven dishes like baking, you better have a recipe. And so where do they fall short? Some people think they've been watching Food Network now since 2000, well, whatever, 15 years ago. Boy, am I old. Since Food Network came out, they do have a little more experience, I wouldn't say necessarily in the kitchen, but more familiarity with food. A lot of people now don't need a recipe to make a pasta, to cook a chicken breast, to throw some salmon on the grill. They have an idea how to do that, and they get hints from TV. Are recipes too cumbersome? I asked a friend about this topic, recipes, and she goes, recipes, oh my God, they're so overwhelming. And this is someone who just recently spent 2 days making beef bourguignon from Julia Child's book after seeing the movie. So there is still some intimidation by really good cooks. Given the variables with a recipe, this is another tricky part. If you write a perfect recipe, Amy, that calls for 8 ounces of salmon, and I use salmon from the tail, which is nice and thin, and she's thinking about salmon from the middle of the fish, which is big and thick, there's an instant variable. We all might use different judgments on what is a pinch. So there's a lot of variables. And I think the last thing is, who is exercising the control? Is it the recipe or is it the cook? And if I read a recipe that calls for a quarter teaspoon of turmeric and half a cup of cauliflower, and I run down to Klusteins in New York City and I buy these 2 things, well, after I make that recipe, I'm stuck with this big jar of turmeric. I really don't know what to do. I'm stuck with 3/4 of the cauliflower. I really might not know what to do. And I've also just put out a pretty good sized outlay maybe for a whole dish that I'm starting from the very beginning to the very end. So there's a lot of issues that go on with that. And it was very funny when we talked Todd English, I'll say it exactly. For me, having to follow a recipe is like being put on a leash. I don't have the patience to do it. And this is someone who has to write the recipes for his cooks, writes cookbooks. It's the same issue that the home cook has. Writing a recipe, following a recipe can be kind of difficult for us.
And I think that, I think that Todd's quote goes back to one of our first key points about the secrets of innovating, which I think, as Ruth Reichel said this morning, the future of food media is going to be created by the innovators. We want you to be all of them. You are here at this conference, you're at the cutting edge, and you will be innovating. And I think the key thing to do is to listen. We listened to Todd English when he said, boy, he hates recipes. We listened to other chefs who were going to point out when they made certain comments, and that really helped us to come up with ideas that could develop new products. So we wanted to take on that subject, when we asked how you reacted. Okay, so you're all a room full of trained professionals, culinary professionals, and you reacted very differently to that topic of the death of recipes. Well, the fact is that as much as we're alike and united by our love of food, we all tend to be very different. And when you're trying to understand the way, who is it that's cooking? Who is it that's using recipes? It's really hard because of the lack of studies, like the UCLA study, to get information on who is using recipes. So you can really use the US population, we would argue, as a surrogate for that. The Myers-Briggs type indicator, anybody familiar with that? Is there some familiarity? Okay, great. We're preaching the converted. We're going to slip right over these slides, but very quickly, what it means is that there is a way to measure people's preferences, and they tend to skew one way or the other on 4 different counts. The first being introversion versus extroversion. Do you get your energy from being alone, or do you get your energy from being with other people? Sensing versus intuition. Do you get your information from your 5 senses, or do you prefer getting it from your 6th sense or your imagination? How do you make your judgments? Do you make them objectively, based on thinking, or do you make your decisions subjectively, based on feeling? And do you have a preference for what they call judgment versus perception, which we're not going to focus on too much, but basically, are you structured and planned out, which we tend to be, or are you a little more flexible and spontaneous, which is one of our weaknesses?